technical difficulty. Can you hear me, Bernard? I can't hear anything. Hold on. 1 2 1 2 1 2. You hear me? Yes. Okay. Interesting, because I don't hear me and I don't hear you. Um, let's try introverse promo long for a sec and see what happens.
What is your original unique idea behind it? And I think maybe for the extrovert, like someone who I talk to, we talk about like sort of like a well. Like the introvert has like a deep well, and it's just like thought, idea, the reservoir. And I think for the extrovert, the well is like it fills up and then they pour it out. Like they fills up and then they pour it out. They fills up and pour it out. They just keep
pain. I think we'll get into that too. Like we were talking about empathy before. It's like I have no problem relating with someone's pain or empathy. It's like I'm in touch with your emotions more than I'm in touch with my own. Like hip hop has definitely been therapeutic for me though in that, because even the way I'm talking right now has so much more emotion than when I was younger. I couldn't even talk like this. I couldn't even go, hey, what's going on, man? I couldn't talk like that. It wasn't in my skill set. And little by little hip hop has definitely brought me out of that shell, being able to emote and to be able to tap into, like you said, the lion, and now I remember that. Like, so whenever I have to go give a presentation that's not about hip hop and just about me talking or whatever, now it's like, yo, remember you're a beast. Remember you're a lion. Remember.
Yeah. So I'm going to hit y'all with something that'll help. So take it to public speaking. We should do a whole episode on public speaking. So here's the thing about public speaking. I think most people who are introverts have been told like, oh, you're not good at public speaking. You're an introvert, right? You're timid. Oh yeah. I was like, no, it's just that the thing that you probably do well is seen as a crutch, right? Like if you're charismatic and you're outgoing, that's seen as like, oh, that's a good public speaker. It's like, no, that's just their gift. They're charismatic.
Right. Okay.
Check. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I had to abandon headphones for some reason. My audio just didn't want to kick in. So, hey, it happens. And I'm looking for us on over here. Have you started that?
No, I'm gonna start it now.
Oh, okay. I was about to start it, but okay, cool if you will.
All right, it is rolling.
We is rolling. There we go. There's my light. Nice. Well, I almost feel like I'm in the light. I'm sort of in the light.
So you said when it doesn't start right at the time, you said what, it doesn't live stream on Facebook?
Yeah, I think I got it started in time though. Why do you not see it on Facebook?
I mean, I haven't looked for the second time, but
Let me check.
It was like 6:55.
Yeah, it's up on Facebook.
Right.
I just have to turn it to global instead of just friends. And yes, we are live. We are live. We are live everywhere.
All
what
right.
Up, Freedom Corner?
Clubhouse is going. Topics added. Replays on. Well, shout out to Clubhouse if you're. I guess. Well, I'm not gonna ping people. Y'all can just find it.
1 2 1 2.
All right. Well, we've been gone for a few weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We're back.
We are back in the saddle again.
We get the pro quo overlay, but so
the pro quo flow. 1 2 1 2. Okay, all right. Sort of. I can never get my Clubhouse headphones to work whenever I'm on here. It's like it never wants to jive. So 1 2 1 2. Okay, I see me talking. Yeah. But then when I put the headphones in, it doesn't want to have me talking. 1 2 1 2. No matter what headphones I put in, this only seems to happen to me. It's like I have to put in like 4 pairs of headphones, and only once in a while do they ever want to work. Yeah. 1 1. Nope.
Uh,
1 2 1 2 1 2.
well,
Nope.
Anthony joined Clubhouse. If you're on Clubhouse, Pro is trying to get
What up,
tech
Anthony?
stuff. Tech stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't want to.
I mean, do you need
1
the
2
headphones or?
1 2. No, I don't. All right, right now it's working where I have it in my hand, but when I put it over here, let's see if it still goes. 1 2 1. Yeah, all right, it's going. All right, now it's working. I think I have just a faulty wire in my phone, and it only acts up. Really, Clubhouse is the only time we notice. So excuse my healthy dinner. My wife and son wanted Kentucky Fried Chicken today, and I said, get me 2 sides. So we are being brought to you by Kentucky Fried Chicken. Kentucky Fried Chicken.
All right, I got you on Clubhouse. Yeah, you might have to lean in for the Clubhouse.
All right.
It's a little.
I can do that.
Low.
1 2 1 2.
You want to switch over this Pro Quo overlay?
Yeah, it's probably not good either. I mean, it's never bad to promote Pro Quo, right?
I mean, I'm not going to argue with it. So
let's do it like this.
Yep, Anthony said volume low as well, and Anthony is a DJ, so he would definitely know.
Intro verse. That's better. That's a little better. All right, we run it. Anthony, can you hear me now? Still low? I'm going to have to get as close as I can. 1 2 1 2. That's about as loud as I think I can probably do, but I can see my mic speaking when I speak, so.
Yeah, talk again.
Check 1 2 in the place to be.
I mean, it's not like the greatest. It's not the worst. It's kind of like, you know.
All right, I'll just lean in and talk loud.
Sounds very roomy, basically. It doesn't sound like. It's not like. It's more like, yeah. We'll go with it. All right. So today's topic: imagination, the reality of imagination. I'll tell y'all what I was thinking about.
Yeah, tell us. Let the people know, because that's posted all over the social media, and people are like, what is this imagination reality kind of thing going?
Well, 2 points. One, last week I was thinking about, is the plight of the introvert just that they will always have to deal with the inner world is where you live in your head, and you know it so intimately, so intricately, that when you try to tell people outside your head, you're always going to be like misunderstood, mistranslated. Because what I want to do most of the time is when I'm talking to people, I got like the whole, franchise, prequel, first movie. See, I got the whole movie Batman 1, 2, and 3 in my head. And I'm like, I can see the whole trilogy. If you could just be in my head right now, I could download my head to you. You'd be like, oh, because I've already created this world of ideas and connections and words and titles and chapters. Then when I have to explain it to a person, in my head, I'm referencing all these things, thinking that, oh, you probably can fill in your own blanks because you have your own world. So I don't want to have to like explain every single thing. But most of the time, people don't. They use, oh, you're over my head, or wait, you're losing me, and I'm just like, okay, now I gotta like lay out my other diagram to explain this diagram. So I was thinking about that, and then second, this idea I came up with a while ago connects to this. So I think the reason that happens is because most people don't really live in the 2D world of imagination. Like most people consider imagination not reality, and they consider the outside world reality. Because, when you're young, people say, oh, use your imagination, just use your imagination. Then when you become an adult, it's like, oh, it's just your imagination, or it's all in your head. So there's this whole kind of like almost shaming of like being in your head, being inside your own thoughts, living in the inner world, where you should live out here with the rest of us. Get out of your head, stop dreaming, stop living in la la land. And so there's always that juxtaposition of that's imaginary, this is real. And it's like, well, no, this is real as well. It's a different kind of real. There's this book called Mind of the Maker by Dorothy Sayers. She said, when you have an idea in your mind, it's not that it's not real. She said, but at the moment, it's only real to you.
Right.
So I like that because it's like, yeah, when you're thinking about something you're going to create or make, there's a translation that's going to happen if you want other people to understand what you're talking about. Like if you invent the iPhone or a computer or the wheel, at some point you want the rest of the world to understand that you have to put it in a physical form or at least draw it. But that doesn't make it any less real because it is a thing. If I said, imagine Hawaii right now, you would go, okay, I'm there. I mean, you're not actually physically in Hawaii, but the thing you're imagining is real. It's not fake. Because otherwise, what does that mean for the thoughts you have, the pictures you have? That means your imagination wouldn't be real. So it's like when people use words differently nowadays, because a lot of things in culture, we have certain words that we switched out now. So this is one of the things I do. I don't say that's imaginary. I say, no, that's 2D reality. And this is 3D reality, to stop making it seem insignificant or less important. So if somebody says that's just all in your head, it's like, yeah, it's in my 2D reality phase. And eventually I will bring it into 3D reality phase.
Right. And what's up, Tree? We see you there. Thanks for checking in and listening.
Faithful.
And absolutely. And shout out to everybody on Clubhouse as well. And by the way, we'll just throw it out there in case you haven't heard us before. This is Introverse with Bernard Hankins and Professor Lyrical. We're just talking all things related to introverts. And today specifically, we're talking about imagination is often juxtaposed to non-reality, but in reality, it is as real as reality, just in a different way. Imagination is 2D reality that ultimately manifests itself as 3D reality. Those are the words of Bernard. So we're breaking that down for everybody. My take on it, well, let me start with this. When I had Philosophy 101, I think I mentioned to you a long time ago, I was able to take another class called Theory of Knowledge right after it, because I ultimately loved philosophy. It was a whole new world for me. I hadn't had anything. I wasn't connected to it, didn't know anything about it. So it was all new for me. I loved it. I loved everything ethics. I loved everything logic, everything philosophy. And by the time I had those 3 courses down, people started saying, hey, you could get a minor with 3 more classes. Little did I know that you couldn't have 2 minors at a time. And I was already starting to minor in economics. And so I was like, this stinks. Well, can I just take the class anyways? And so I got permission to take a graduate level class during my second semester, my freshman year. And it was called Theory of Knowledge. And this is at UMass Lowell. And the professor I had, they were husband and wife, both in the same department. And I just loved them. I thought they were great. And the book was The Tacit Dimension. It was called The Tacit Dimension by Polya, I believe. It's either Polya or Polyani. And I'll have to look that up when we're in between stuff. But the concept of the tacit dimension was similar to what you're describing in a philosophical sense. And it basically went like this. The tacit dimension is a dimension in our minds that is the understood but not spoken, or can't be perfectly spoken, because the purest place that it is in our imagination, if you will, or in our mind. And once we go to try to speak that into word, there's a dimension or a portion, if you will, of it that is left behind that is not translated. And so it's most perfect in the imagination or in our head. And every attempt that we do creatively to get it out is usually a little less perfect than the actual true idea as it's starting to manifest. So in other words, this dimension is the piece that's lost in translation. And that fascinated me because I felt, as a creative, I always felt that. I felt like I had sort of like Bernard said about part 1, 2, and 3. I have the essence of what it is I want to communicate before I put it to pen and pad or before I put it to tape or what have you. And I try to be truthful to myself how good of a job I did communicating that. And I only stop when it's a very near facsimile of the essence. Words aren't perfectly there. They're swirling and the idea is there. The colors are there often. I feel like the palette is right there and the essence is there. And once I do my job really closely, then I stop and I go, yes, this is what I meant to achieve. And there's a little bit in that tacit dimension too that I would say that works the other way. That there's this magic that happens in the translation medium too that actually sometimes does it better than I had it in my head. Like it's swirling around and I got the right idea, but sometimes when I throw it on the canvas, it helps me see it and go, oh yeah, that's even better. Like this is exactly the best manifestation of it for the time and place that it's in. So there's definitely something to that. So I guess where I'm going is where you say imagination is 2D and in reality is 3D. I would almost challenge you to say, could it not be closer to 3D and 2D the other way around, if you know what I mean? Meaning that sort of like the tacit dimension where it's a little more
Right.
perfect in your head sometimes. So,
Right.
my take on
Well, I'll come back to that because I'll come back to that because I thought about that today too. But to what you were just saying, your first point, you probably enjoy this book. The book I mentioned, The Mind of the Maker, Dorothy Sayers. I just found it at a book sale once, and I was like, this book was made for me because she talks about what's very interesting. She compares the creative process to the Trinity. She says there's the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. She says the Father is like the infinite, expansive, uncontainable. You'll never get to your head around it. But it's like you're saying, it's the fullness, the essence. The Son is the incarnated, and it's a glimpse of the Father. And so, although it's not the fullness, like you can at least get a grasp on it. And then she's like, the Holy Spirit is like the thing delivered to the audience, and then even the audience gets to respond back to the original. So she called it like the book. Like if you're writing a book, whatever you put, a book, dance, song, she was like, there's the book as thought, the book as written, and then the book as like dispersed to the world and then brought back. So I thought that was a very interesting concept that she came up with. But yeah, I focus on the first two where she's like, yeah, you have this essence, this thing. You're like, oh, there it is. And when it's in your head, everything's perfect, and you're like, oh, this feels so great. And then when it comes out, you're like, oh, this is garbage. Because it's like the physical world can't contain this vision in your head. Like everything in your head is perfect. You're like, yes.
That's well said.
You're like, when this comes out, people are going to be amazed. And then when it comes out, even you're not amazed. You're like, this is horrible. Like this is such a letdown. I think I recorded something last week on Clubhouse. I was like, I called it disappointed by reality or something, or disappointed by 3 dimensions. Because it's like you get so excited about, like you're saying, the essence in your head, but then the material world, because it fades away, entropy, decay, sin, all this stuff is like, oh, I'm painting all this stuff and it's going to eventually get thrown away. I'm making this music, it's eventually going to deteriorate. So you put all your hope and passion and dream into these physical objects only to have them die. So you're disappointed. The creative introvert is often disappointed. So that essence thing I definitely connect with because I think that's where I live the most. It's almost like sometimes I'd much rather just dream forever and never make a thing. Because like once it's made and it's like, now it's done. I can't dream anymore. It's almost like it's a letdown to have the thing manifested in reality, even though I can show people and even though I can be like, oh man, I made this. There's almost like I just want to keep it in my head to myself.
I looked up, like I was saying, I looked up what that book exactly was called. And this is it right here. For anybody interested, it is actually Polanyi, not Polanyi, or not Polya. Polya, actually, it's funny. I always get them confused. Polya has a book, a math book. It's on the ways to answer any problem. It's sort of like a 6-step problem solving technique. So it's funny. They're very similar in a lot of ways. So if you can see this here, 125 hardcover, down to 21 for paperback. Wow. The tacit dimension, the little quote here says, I shall reconsider human knowledge by starting from the fact that we can know more than we can tell, writes Michael Polanyi, whose work paved the way for the likes of Thomas Kuhn and Karl Popper. The tacit dimension argues that tacit knowledge, tradition, inherited practices, implied values, and prejudgments is a crucial part of scientific knowledge. Back in print for a new generation of students and scholars, this volume challenges the assumption that skepticism rather than the established belief lies at the heart of scientific discovery. Anyways, so that's that. Speaking of theory, book, and all this kind of stuff, too, while we're on the topic, one other thing that's interesting is, and this is really for the physics nerds out there, Leonard Susskind, world famous physicist, theoretical physicist. You can watch his videos on YouTube if you're into that kind of thing. He has a theory, and because it's from him, people are forced to take it seriously. So this isn't some like wingnut kind of guy out there. This is one of the most respected physicists in the world. Some people would put him on the level of not only Einstein, but on probably similar footing with I just forgot his name. He wrote the he's the gentleman who was in the chair with the voice. He recently I'm sorry. Hawking. Yeah. Hawking. So Hawking radiation, Hawking entropy, all these kind of things. The book on the whole universe or whatever these written. So, anyways, him and Hawking went back and forth on a lot of things too. So Susskind is a contemporary of him. His theory is that there is and I won't go deep into it, a very surface level, just to throw it out there if anyone's curious. His theory is the holographic principle. And he talks about a 3D volume is mirrored by characteristics of its 2D manifestation. In other words, what that the shorthand of that is that it says as we get close to a black hole, the black hole may seem to be emitting a 3D world from 2D information. And it gives rise to the idea, are we sort of in a hologram? So that's kind of wild. So there's a lot of back reading that would go into that, and you could really watch his videos and so forth. But it's very interesting, too, talking about that our world is a mapping from a 2D reality that appears to be 3D, but its information is coming from a 2D world. So the question is this 3D world that we're in essentially like a holograph, as opposed to a more flatter 2D manifestation? Totally interesting sidebar that's very much in the language that we're using here. And I always think it's interesting because physics, especially theoretical physics, has so much underpinning in the imagination place because it's theoretical, right? You're coming up with theories that you're testing, and when you have a theory in science, a theory is something that has been established. It seems to be what it is, and it needs to be refuted for it to essentially be discredited. Right? So it's not essentially the same thing as like, hey, I have a theory, I have a thought. It's tested, meaning it's stood the test to become a theory in science. And so, the job is for people to sort of disprove them once they gain credibility and footing. And I just think it's interesting how imagination leads to so much of this in science. And, you saw a little bit of the disclaimer there in the Polanyi book talking a little bit about the same thing. So it's interesting how our science a lot of times emerges from the imagination and sometimes vice versa. Our imagination certainly can come from science because right now we're doing that with quantum physics. We're like, what does this mean? What is the underpinning? And there's a lot of hope for, typically, I would say this, people who are spiritual and or religious usually don't feel very comfortable in the land of science and physics because it seems to be at odds. There's a lot of room for germination between the two in the worlds of quantum. Quantum offers insights into some of these things that say, okay, what does this mean? Is the world largely spiritual? Is the world largely made up of some kind of rules that we're not aware of that seem to countermine our everyday intuition? Our intuition doesn't work, so what we think about the universe is fundamentally wrong. What we see playing out in the 3D world, of the macroscopic 3D world, is wrong because we know what's happening in the microscopic world is nothing like what we're seeing here in this world. Where if two particles, if Bernard is a particle and I am a particle and we become entangled, intimately, it's like saying Bernard's vibration rubs off on mine, to really make it simple, right? And now we're in the same vibration state. We will be in the same vibration state forever. And whatever happens to Bernard, I will replicate the opposite reaction no matter where you place me in the universe. That's what happens at the microscopic level when we're looking at quantum. And the world is ultimately probability based. There's only a probability where Bernard is located, and there's only a probability where I'm located. And until you know where Bernard is, you don't really know anything about me. But the information is communicated faster than the speed of light, so it seems, and that seems to violate what Einstein had put forward a long time ago. And it creates this paradox that how can information be shared faster than the speed of light? And we have no idea how it happens. All we know is repeated time and time again. It's one of the most repeated experiments in all of science history, is that this is a fact that is happening, and we have no idea why. How could it possibly be that Bernard and I could be spread across the universe, and just looking at Bernard tells me wherever I am in the universe that Bernard has been looked at, and I react in the opposite way that Bernard has been messed with. So if Bernard is, in other words, if Bernard has spin up, I have what's called spin down. So we're intimately linked forever. Well, at least it seems forever. We don't know a way to undo them right now. And that's what we talk about. We talk about quantum, and we talk about entanglement. That's what it means to be entangled. So that's pretty wild stuff, that you have these worlds intersecting, right? It starts out with imagination. Like, what could this mean? What would this theory be, right? And now you start to test it. And now science is being informed first by the theoretical, the imagination. And now it's sort of this vice versa, and it gets into that age-old question, art imitating reality or reality imitating art. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, I mean, you're making me think of a lot of stuff. I'm just going to kind of like bullet point them because I want to go back to the 2D and 3D. But yeah, there was this guy. He actually died several years ago. He was a cool guy. His name was David Van Hoovering. And he actually worked a lot with Bob Moog on the Moog synthesizers. Like they did all this like experiments and stuff. So he would invent these instruments.
Most people who work with synthesizers are way out there. They are way, way out there. Kurzweil's another one. He's a theoretical physicist and futurist who's way out there.
So he worked with Moog. So he was a Christian, and he would talk about like quantum faith. And he was like, "You're not elsewhere. You're like elsewhen or something." I can't remember, elsewhere or else. Whatever the phrase he said, either elsewhere versus elsewhen. And he would talk about just lights and sounds and how it all connected with God. And he had his website. I downloaded some of his stuff, but his website's not up anymore. But I hope somebody puts it back up because he had all these lectures.
Right.
But yeah, just like the whole string theory and the fact that, if you look at our core, who we are, like we're vibrating. So we're not even really, like we have this illusion that we're solid, right?
Right.
Like we feel like, oh, I'm made of bone and skin. It's like, no, but you're a vibrating thing. You're not actually static,
right?
Makes me think of this quote somebody had put on Facebook years ago. They were quoting
that's what underpins everything, by the way, in quantum, is the whole idea of waves being particles and particles being waves. And once they're particles, you think physical, and when a wave, you think a continued field. You think of like a field or a stream of energy, right? As opposed to a particle that you can pinpoint and go, there it is. There's the physical solid. Right. Where do they cease, and why is it that particles can be waves and waves can be particles, and they can just basically choose when to be what they want to be?
Right. So this quote somebody had put on Facebook, it was, I think, from the Chronicles of Narnia, and they were saying something, the mystery is not the unseen, but rather the seen. And so that always struck me as like, we think this world is like, oh man, like this is so normal. And it's like, no, this is, he's like, they're saying the spiritual part is always there. Like this seen, physical, three-dimensional, like that's the weird thing. The fact that exists, you should be marveling at that. Well, we, in our movie world, we always have like the ghost rises up out of the body and it can float through walls, and we're like, ooh, supernatural. And it's like, no, it's the other way around. Like that's natural. Like this is the supernatural. This is like the weird part.
Right. Like, why are we gluing together into things?
Right. So okay, so let's to the 3D and the 2D. So you were saying like, okay, maybe one reason I say that your internal world imagination is 2D and your external world is 3D is because, well, physically we understand length, width, depth, and that's what our minds are oriented to. And then time, fourth, when you see a computer, a picture, even though the screen itself might have depth, like the actual image that you're looking at is usually 2 dimensions. Right. Or if you're watching a movie, it's, there's 2 dimensions, it's flat. When you think about things in your head, even though you can imagine them 3-dimensionally, I guess I think of people's minds almost as like, obviously the original computer. Like it's the place where you can do anything, and the reality without the risk. It's like reality minus the risk. Like I can jump off a building in my head and survive, right? Like I could flatten something, that's why I always make the argument, the phone. Like this phone wasn't always flat. It used to be banana shaped. And somebody said, oh, what if we did this? They did that in their mind, and then they tried it in reality. So, oh, it works. Like you're saying, theory to manifestation. So in some ways I say it's 2D because there's a property about your mind which you literally can't touch it, right? I literally can't touch inside my mind. So in a sense, it is flat. In the meaning that it doesn't have the tactile depth. Like it's, I guess I wonder if the word tacit, like you say, it's interesting, tacit, tactile, I wonder if those are connected. So, but I was thinking today, as you were saying, is like, yeah, in some ways though, back to that essence idea, maybe your mind is the full, reality. So who else I was mentioning this to recently? They was like, yeah, it's probably beyond 3 dimensions. Because I would say, yeah, your imagination, I said your imagination is the bridge to the spiritual. So I would say your imagination is the bridge to the spiritual, where the, I don't know, 8 dimensions, 12, however many dimensions there are there, like that's the access to all the dimensions. But here, the interesting part though is this. There is, like you were talking about the vice versa. I think this is a thing that's hard for people to get because we live so much in physical bodies. Things come out of my mind and I make them physically, but then they re-enter my mind and they become non-physical again, right? Let's say if I make a drawing, it comes out of my imagination. I see it on the page. Now my physical eyes are looking at it, and then my imaginative eyes are reassessing, like, did that look like I thought it would look? Right. Do I want to change that? How is my mind shifted and shaped now by this physical thing I've looked at? So now I'm making adjustments in my head, and then I bring it out again. So it's never just one directional. Like we're always creating, intaking, and then so it's really a loop.
Yep.
I create, I make, I adjust, I reevaluate, and then I create value, I reevaluate. That's this diagram I always talk about. Like you create value, and then you reevaluate. You're always assessing. That could be better. Did that come out the way I wanted? What does that mean? And then you shape. So it's 2D and 3D, but really it's, I don't know, I guess maybe we call it 5D, because if you take the 2 and the 3 and add them together, you're constantly in this, figure 8 loop from internal to external of yourself. And I think that's what's interesting because.
So it's a Mobius strip.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's an infinite Mobius strip. And the thing is, most people, at least Americans, I don't think about that, because most Americans are taught, like, you think of something, you produce it. It's linear. You think of something, you produce it. It's very about productivity. You make this thing, it's done, you use it, you make another one. And it's like, no, but the creative person is like, yeah, I make the thing and I finished it, but then I reprocess it. Like everything you've ever done, I'm sure everything I've ever done is a constant, like, looping back on itself, a layering on itself, like an egg or like a Russian doll within itself, like every beat I've ever made is now coming through somehow in the new beat that I've made, like conceptually. But even like when I do it on the computer, it's like, oh, I'm going to resample my own sample. And then I'm going to resample my own sample of my own. So we're constantly doing this infinite loop, this infinite regression as humans. I definitely think that's the God, being made in God's image part. Like you just keep stacking and stacking and stacking and looping. So because we live in the physical world and we're more attached to the physical world, I think it's harder for people to really grasp that constant inner outer is going on. Because it's hard to think of. It's easy to see the outer, right? You just look, oh, there it is, 3 dimensions. The inner world is what gets people tripped up. Like, how do I see my inner world? Most people don't live there like we're talking about, like we live there.
It reminds me of when I think about, which is always so fun to do, but it always is a fruitless exercise, to try to imagine a different sense that you don't have. You think about how limited our imagination actually is when you take senses out of it. Like if we ask everyone in the world to have a contest, we're going to have $1 million contest for someone to imagine a sense that we already don't have. I should say already, that we don't have already, right? it's so difficult because, some people will say temperature is a sense, right? We can tell the temperature, but in a way that feels like touch, right? It's like, you can feel heat on your skin and you can kind of, but temperature is a little different. Like air temperature is a little different, right? But you see how we always have to wrestle with something that we can already understand. Something
Right.
that, it's so, imagine trying to explain smell, it's like explain smell to someone who doesn't have it. And it's, you start using other combinations of the four to get to the fifth, right? Sight, similarly.
Right.
Somebody didn't have sight. It's like, how do you explain that? And it's so difficult because all of the adjectives that we can imagine are tied to sight itself. When we think of brightness, when we think of, but at some point, you have to communicate brightness crossing the metaphor. The words talking about this with synapses and linking to disparate parts of your brain. It's like somehow we have to create the metaphor that explains to someone who doesn't have sight what sight is kind of like. Or can you? And that gets into that tacit dimension. It's like, is there a perfect way we can do that? Like in our mind, we know what it is. Like we're sitting here going, oh, yeah, I know what sight is. Let me explain sight to someone who's blind, who's never had vision. It's like, hey, those shapes that you're touching with your hand? There's another way to experience them. And it's not sound, right? It's like you start running out of words. There's this way that I really can't explain to you. I know it. I don't know how to say it. Maybe I can make a song about it. I don't know what I can do. Maybe I can make my sound so different, certain one, that it has a relationship to something else. It's such a difficult concept
Right.
to try to think about this. I mean, I would love to hear other people try to do that. Right? Give me a. People say, oh, we might have like 20 different senses. Yeah, we might. Right? But how the heck are you going to explain it? And so it's like we're blind to those senses that we might have until someone shows us the way. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And then it's like, oh, how can I be so stupid? Of course there was smell. Like, what was that? Of course
Right.
the air is going to have some kind of quality that I can interpret. Right? But you can sort of say that with sight. Hey, it's the air. You can kind of see it. Well, that's kind of light, right? And it's this weird thing you can't really put your fingers on, and you feel it slipping away, and you're trying to compare and contrast things with stuff that either the receiver doesn't have the ability to perceive or that we don't have the words for. And it gets into the whole 2D, 3D with imagination. It's like, here it's interesting because we're talking about something that we know exists and trying to explain
Right.
to somebody else. But there's got to be ones that do exist that we don't know about and that we can't even fathom what they would be. At least I can't. I don't have any. It's not like I have any success with this. It's not like, hey, I got one.
Well, I'll try to remember to send you. I actually recorded. I finally got around to recording because two things I've been thinking about for a while. It was in my head. I knew what I wanted to say. I just wanted to record it. So
That tacit dimension.
it was one about the hierarchy of senses, and then the other one was about what was I forgot what it was called. But basically, I came up with this thing about how your five senses are interconnected, like they're all serving the same goal, and they're sort of like your body is all different parts, but they're all trying to do a focused goal. So I was like, your senses are the same thing. So like your eyes can see, but your ears obviously can't see. I know how. Let me start. How to? It's like if you're in the woods, right, and you hear a noise. If you have access to your eyes and your ears, after you hear, you're going to look.
Right.
So it's almost like the ears say, like, "Hey, I need your help, eyes.
Over here.
Like, it's coming over here. I need you to visualize what happened."
Yep.
Because your eyes, as you're saying, like your eyes take in multiple types of information. And I think here's the other thing I recorded was about like your senses in relation to like the arts. It's like if you think about a film is visual mostly. So there's color, there's depth, there's shape, there's speed, there's motion, there's like all these things. That's why you can't watch a movie passively. Like your whole visual attention has to be paid attention to the screen because that's what it is. However, with a podcast, you could be in your car passively listening or running or doing work around the house because your ears don't have to like literally stop and watch the podcast.
Right.
They can just receive. So there's like all these different strengths of each sense, and then those strengths and weaknesses cause them to rely on one another. And so I was talking about just like in that point where they cross over, that's where you're starting to get into the stuff you're talking about. There's this kind of like in between zone where like you're kind of see hearing, or hear seeing, or smell tasting, or even the fact that like your nose and your mouth are connected, right?
Yeah.
The fact that
They seem to go together, right? Like taste,
or
and
like you can
smell
kind of
seem
sometimes
to-
you can like I can like sometimes you taste something without actually tasting it, right? Like you just walk through and you're like, ooh, I can kind of taste the garbage. You're not trying to taste it, you're not physically tasting it, but your nose is like, hey, this is a preview.
Yeah.
I think that's how I described it. Like it's almost like your eyes like preview for your ears, like your nose like previews for your mouth.
Like the ball's gonna hit you in the face,
Right?
Like
so every other sense gives a preview to the other sense of what's coming. So they're connected in that sense. And there was something else I came up with that.
Well, the thing about taste and smell, I think, is connected to touch for me too. Like you can't taste the food without touching it.
Right.
So it's a special kind of touch. It's a touch that has flavor, right? It would be like a touch that has sound. It'd be like, imagine if when you touch something, it does make a sound, right? And so it's like, what if everything you touched had a sound, no matter how softly you touch it? Like if you touch it with bang, you know what I mean? It's like, that's closest is what smell kind of is. It's like you're tasting it with some extra dimension to it. It's like, they go hand in hand, and it's like taste goes with touch more than smell goes with touch. Even though you're smelling something that has some physical characteristic to it, but the aroma is sort of floating through the air. It's like this is telling you something about how this is going to taste, which you need to touch to know what it tastes like. And sight, depending on what it is, sight could be, hey, there's this thing over there that's going to hit you, or it could be, hey, there's this, and then of course you're going to feel it, and there could be really this thing that's going to miss you, like you're going to miss that opportunity over there and you're not going to be able to experience it. But normally it's connected to a preview of touch, and it's like sound is a preview of sight, which is a preview of touch. So it's like when you get touched, that's kind of like the core, it's because it's like coming into you, and they all kind of meet around touch, I think, in a lot of ways. But I like that idea of the sort of the preview, it's like a shadow of the thing. It sounds like allegory in the cave, sort of, allegory cave, where it's like we're getting a glimpse of what that thing is. But yeah, I mean, it gets away from imagination, but it's like imagination is rooted in the senses, because you even think what we're doing, like when we're using imagination, we're visualizing some things that aren't always visual either. Like, I mean, I know I visualize a song without a doubt.
Right.
I mean, like I'm visualizing the song. I'm visualizing what it's going to sound like, if that makes sense,
Right.
And imagination is intimately connected to, like, I can imagine what it's going to feel like. I can imagine what it's going to taste like. I can imagine what it's going to smell like. It's like the grand preview to all of them. You know what I'm saying? It's like imagination seems like a sense when you take it that way, because it's like the higher correlation of the five senses in preview mode, like, oh, I can imagine what this would be like before it happens. So it's like activating all those senses before the reality hits, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, because I was in the room on Clubhouse a while ago, we were talking about this idea of more than five senses, and we got down this whole. I don't think replays were on Clubhouse at the time as a feature, but it got very interesting because we were talking about like a sense of humor, or like a sense of yourself, and I was like, oh yeah, the way we use that word, I never thought about it. So what are these other senses? But yeah, the imagination being the preview to them all. I like that, and I was gonna say. Well, the thing I was going to say back to the hierarchy of the senses, I was trying to think of some word things we do. Like sometimes like, it's there, I can almost taste it, right? I'm sure there's some other words. I was trying to think of like, do you use a sight word to describe hear or vice versa? I'm sure we do in our language.
Definitely use feel all the time. Boy, I can feel that.
Yeah. Or the one I was going to say was, okay, so this kind of gets back to the 2D, 3D, or the internal, external. If somebody plays you a song, you say, man, I really felt that. Are they saying they
Right.
physically felt it? No, they're saying I resonated.
It moved me. Yeah.
Yeah, it moved me. So internally, emotionally, you were moved or you felt without feeling. So it's interesting how you use the term feel to describe physical touch. Or that's it. Like, I was really touched.
Right.
Right.
That's emotion. Yeah.
So it's emotion, but it also, that same word describes touch. So it's like there, the external touch shares a word with the internal touched.
Yeah.
And most
Yeah.
people be like, oh,
Emotions to me are in a way like reactions to the senses. Like,
right.
you know what I mean? When you think of like a bat having sonar, right? Or
Right.
other animal. I know there's other animals that have sonar. It makes it really easy for us to imagine because we're doing it by going, oh yeah, I know what the bat's doing, right? But what we're still going to do is we're still going to compare those to things that we have. Like it's kind of like sight and sound, sonar. It's kind of like sound. Okay, we're throwing the sound out. It's going to bounce back and it's going to hit us in some reverb center, and we're going to go, oh,
Right.
that's how far away it is, right? So it's a spatial kind of awareness. And I mean, you could say that spatial is very visual. Like I'm looking in my room, I can see the space dimension. But it's
Right.
also because I'm so familiar with sound and touch that I kind of can perceive the depth from things that I've touched and distances that I've experienced. Like you experience distance with your eyes, but you also touch them. You know, it's like, oh, I know what that's going to feel like, that amount of space between there. Like you reach out
Right.
and try to feel when you're going through space. There's this like touch connection. So the way we can understand something like sonar is because we're really in tune with our touch and our sound and our vision. You know, those might be the three that you'd say that those are kind of connected to. It's not taste.
Right.
There's no taste, I think, and there's really no smell. I would take those out, but sonar is kind of like sight, sound, and touch. Those are the close ones. So if there's some kind of combination of them, then we can usually relate to that. Like a shark can sense blood in the water, right? That's most
Right.
close to smell. And a shark can feel vibrations, right, of an animal that's, you know, having an issue, right? So it knows should swoop in and attack. It feels the vibration, but it's a different kind of feel. It's like it
Right.
senses the oscillations in the water. That's kind of
Right.
like touch, you know. But outside of those ones that we can come close to looking at for something else, yeah, it's a real tough job to try to do that, and it's interesting why it's a tough job. You know, and it's like
Well,
if you could perceive it in another way, well, you
right.
would have that sense. So it's like,
Right.
what does it mean to be 5 dimensions, right? People love doing
Right.
drawings, right? I love reading people's drawings. When they go, oh yeah, we're going to show you what the 5th dimension looks like. I'm like, great, I'm ready for it because it's going to be some fudged kind of diagram. Like you'll always see it like a torus or something, and the inside
Right.
part. It's always like the inside of the extra dimension that they're always trying. Like
Right.
the whole idea that there being like 12-dimensional space or 9-dimensional space. Sometimes you read, it's like I've seen 11, 12, 13, 9. Right? These are all different. 7 was a big one for a long time, right? And physics keeps changing them because these are super small dimensions that are inside of each other. Really, it's kind of
Right.
like inner space of another dimension, and you can't really picture that, no matter what people say. Like, yeah, show me what 7-dimensional space looks like. Good luck with that one. You know what I'm saying? It's like because we don't live in a 5D
Right.
world.
Well, I think
like,
also that gets to the idea, people who are, especially, when you cut off your imagination, you start thinking extra logical, linear, literal. So when most people say, what's the extra dimension? Their first thought is to, like you say, draw another line. And then it's this weird oblong thing. Where a lot of times dimension is more about like the quality or the nature of something, like time. Like when people say time is a dimension, you're like, how is time a dimension? I can't touch it. It's like, that's what, like, a dimension doesn't mean dimensions. Like, when you buy a IKEA set, and it's like, put these things together in these dimensions. Like, that's what most people think. They're thinking physical. But a dimension, it'd be interesting to look up the origin of the word dimension. To something. We have to look up the origin of it.
metric measure is what it is.
Metric measure. But just like, okay, like when I try to think about like when people make music, it's like, I'm about to go to another level. Like, what are they saying? They're taking it to volume 10 versus 9? No, they're saying like, I'm taking you some combination of emotions that you've never
Right.
thought of before, never been configured or arranged. Like I'm taking you somewhere that you haven't imagined yet. And so it's almost like when your imagination is in play, you're able to pull people from what they know to this thing that is refreshing, but it's not necessarily a change of the expected way they think things are going to play out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you're just you turn things on their head, you show them from your perspective, you add something, you go like, oh, whoa, I didn't know that was a thing. You're like, yeah, that's a thing. Like I didn't just add another leg to a table. It's like the fifth leg, you know. So I think that's one thing. And the other thing I was going to say is like, let's go back to the word touch. If somebody says, you know, you touched me, or you touched me, like it's interesting that that word speaks to the actual, you know, your epidermis, but it also speaks to your emotion, and your the immaterial and the material are connected by that word. And most people say, oh, it's just metaphorical. We just mean it because that's the only way we can describe it. It's like, but no, like if you think inner, outer, those two things are linked. Like I was saying, your mind and then the world you create, they're linked. If you continue to remind yourself as you get older, like, oh yeah, the things I think become reality, and the things that I envision become my internal reality. I mean, think about a lot of people, they watch the news and like, I'm so depressed. It's like, yeah, because you're recording reality into yourself and you're like meditating on it. I mean, that's in Proverbs, like as a man thinks, so is he. Like as a man thinks and meditates, you become that. So I think it's interesting that the inner world and outer world, they are actually linked, and we don't think about that because we tend to think when something is physical, it's more real, like I was saying in the beginning. So the last thing I'll say on that is there's this interesting book by C.S. Lewis called The Screw Tape Letters, and it's basically like written in a letter format, correspondence. So it's this elder demon who's like mentoring a younger demon, and the younger demon's like, oh, I've been trying to like get this Christian caught in sin. Like, what am I doing wrong? He's like, you idiot, you were too obvious. You got it. So he's basically just mentoring him on how to like trip up Christians. And so as the reader is watching, it's like, oh, this is what C.S. Lewis is telling us. This is how Satan tricks us. Like he's giving us the tactics by this book. But one of the things he said when your assigned person starts to pray, like convince them to like not kneel. He said, because these young, stupid idiots, they don't understand that their body and their spirit and their soul are all linked. So even when you're physically kneeling, that does something to you, like emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So think about it. Why do we do rituals? Why do we do these, like symbolic things at funerals, at weddings? Like, are they actually?
I think rituals are ridiculous, personally.
But I'm just saying, like, why do we do symbolic things? Because it's not, that when you throw a rose on a grave, it's not like doing anything, right? But there's something about that physical act that you are, I call it emotionally convinced. Like you're emotionally convincing yourself that something is changing. Like I went through this counseling and the guy was like, all right, all the people you have unforgiveness, like write their name on the paper. He's like, we're going to rip him up and we're going to throw him in the trash can. Like, was that actually physically doing something? No, but there was something that my like physical and emotional self needed to signify. Shh, like this is an act.
Right.
It is actualized. Like, did I still have to do other work, like actually forgive them and practice? Yeah. But it's something about these symbolic acts.
If you want ritual, you go to the Catholic Church, my friend. Oh my gosh.
But there's just something about the physical. I think it's fun. Like the physical is overemphasized, but it can also be underemphasized. It's like if you don't do ritualistic things, something about your mind and emotion says like, well, is it real then? Right. Like I always say, like a wedding ring doesn't really mean anything. Like you could be married to somebody without a wedding ring, but something about that wedding ring makes you feel kind of anchored. Like, oh, I always say, like if you're sitting at a cafe and someone starts flirting with you, you could easily be like, oh, am I married? Right. But that wedding ring, like on your finger, is like, oh yeah, oh right. This metal thing, which is squeezing my finger, reminds me, oh yeah, this. So there is something valuable about the physical, but it's not the essence. It's not back to the essence, like we were saying.
Shout out to Tree. Think it and feel it. Yeah, absolutely. And don't think that I didn't catch your multiple C.S. Lewis references on the tacit level earlier with the. Would you give us the Chronicles of Narnia earlier? You were in some C.S. zone. Did you? I don't remember if it was Witch in the Wardrobe or Chronicles of Narnia. You said one of them earlier.
Yeah, this was not intended. It's just the references come as they come.
They come. You were in the tacit zone. That's what it was. What was that rap that was in Chronicles of Narnia? Remember that with the guy from Saturday Night Live? That was the big controversy.
It was the Chronic. It was like the Chronic.
Yeah. I was actually interviewed about that. What for like the Boston Globe or something about the Chronicles of Narnia rap or something. I was like, I really,
I have no.
You want to say no
association.
comment, but it's like, yeah, you want to say no comment, but it's like, there you go. I do like the idea of the 2D, 3D, as just sort of metaphor, as just sort of. I'm not even sure I 100% agree. I just like it though. I like the idea of thinking, that we typically think of that as the paradigm, right? That we get this 2D kind of or not quite real thing until we manifest it out there. Like, what makes a song so real compared to a song in my head? It's like, oh, it's out there and other people can experience it, right? And it's like, yeah, it feels like it has slightly more dimensional space to keep with that, right? It's like, oh, it's in my head, but now it's in your head, right? And it was in my head as alphabet soup in a way until I organize it and put it on a palette, if you will, right? So I put it on, and it's like, now I can edit it. Now I can take this thing and I can give it to you. Here you go. Whereas before, it gets back to all that tacit stuff. It's like, I know what I mean, but we have to have some agreed level playing field that we can both go, oh, now I see what you're thinking, and that's the beauty of being able to read music or play music or whatever, and that's a whole nother issue. It's like my son, I was reading this kid's book to my son and last night, and it had a bunch of musical notes in the middle and a song. And I was like, I'm not exactly sure how to sing this, but I just went for it because I was like roughly reading the music, and I'm not great at reading music. I have passing knowledge of how to read music, so I'm like, all right, and I was doing this, and he goes, I know that song, Daddy. And I was like, you do, but I'm not sure if that's exactly what those notes said. It's like, I was interpreting what somebody else was trying to say. It's funny how that is what that whole idea is for, right? I'm going to write you the notes before we had a way to record it. You know what I'm saying? Because remember back in the day, you either played the music or it stayed in your head. Right. It was like someone went, I need a way to write it down so I can save it. Like, we would have never come up with writing music as a thing if we first had recording. You know what I'm saying? Like, who would have like writing notes? Why would I do that? Like, I can just look at the spectral analysis, or if you will, I can look at the graphic readout, but of course we didn't have that first. And it's like, think about that back in the day, your Mozart or whoever, like, yo, I got this idea. Oh, really? You want to show it to me? No, I left all my equipment at home. Can you hum it? Kind of, but there's a lot of parts that are stacked on top of each other. Right. So what am I going to do? I'm going to have to write it in some symbolic notation. And it's like, it's crazy that we actually came up with that and that it works, right? Is that we came up with a way to take that code from what's in our head, write it down, and replicate it so that anyone in the universe can play it before we even had a way to record the music. That's pretty clever if you really think about it. That's some high level stuff. It's like, yeah, you think about, I say this all the time about classical music. My dry insult to classical music is my dry diss is classical music is like dun 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 dun. That's not complex. You can play it with one finger, right? It's just that it's stacked with multiple parts doing things at the same time. I mean, we could all play that with one finger, essentially. But this is going. And it's stacked with like 30 instruments on top of each other, all playing their own instrument. And it's like, oh, that's so genius. And it's like, is it? It was dun 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 dun. It was like, dude, that's Linus playing on the keyboard. You know what I mean? Like, but it's when you stack it and a bunch of stuff going on. Someone's got to write that down. And when you look at that, you're like, oh, it's a masterpiece. Right. Because of how much has been characterized in that sheet music. And I wonder if classical would have been called classical, if it would have been so classic, if there would have been a way to record back then before having to read 50 different parts at the same time,
Interesting. Yeah, I guess so. That's what people kind of say about computer music now. Like, oh, you're just clicking around. It's not really creating. They think because of the ease of it, it's not You know,
Right. That somehow makes it easier. Right.
Well, the last thing I'll say, yeah, I mean, just the idea of what makes a song more real, or any idea real. I think I mentioned this on one of our other podcasts or Clubhouse. I was basically saying, I don't think the fact that something is physical makes it more real. And I guess you could even argue that something is imaginary doesn't make it more real either. I think the connecting point is, because you have an imagination and you live in the physical world, as your sense of being in the world desires for both parts to be satisfied. So if somebody told you like, hey, you're going to get paid, like you get the idea, you're like, oh, great, I'm getting paid. If you never got paid, your hand is like, hey, I'm missing that feeling of the cash in my hand. You know, it's just like you just were told that a physical representation of this idea was going to come. When it doesn't come, you feel like you were cheated. Or I say, like, you know, if you're dating someone or married to someone, you can say, I love you all the time, but they still want you to do something. They still want you to like do an action. Or you could do actions all the time. You could do all the things, all your love languages, but they still want to hear those words like, I love you. Just because you have ears and you have words, your words part want to feel the words. And because you have hands, like your hands want to feel the hands. So both of them are equally real, and you just have to meet them with the same currency.
I can't say anything on top of that. That's well put. That's well put. I concur. I don't often just concur, but I concur.
Well, I mean, it's perfect. We can roll the outro, and
we can roll.
You can be on time.
Absolutely. And for all of my my Pro Quo people out there who may be like, what happened to Pro Quo? Hey, when Pro Quo airs at the same time as the Celtics championship, there's no Pro Quo show, folks. Just put it out there. So I just want to do the math in my head here, and we got to go. So tomorrow, game 5. Okay, let's assume Celts win. Goes back to Boston 3 days later, which will be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I think we're in the clear, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Yes, I think Sunday 8:00 would be. So Sunday 8:00, Bernard, could be a game 7. So we might be nestled in between our 6 to. We will have a very hard 8:00 on that night. So,
well, I mean, I'm out of school, so we can do something during the week as well.
I know we got to talk. I got to find out more about the end of school year. Some interesting stuff there as well. It has all kinds of ripple implications. And, well, I will play that outro, and I will see you in the schoolyard.
All right. Peace out.
Peace.